Welcome to my first podcast. My name is Jay Kennedy, and I am really excited to have my first guest, Mongo. He ran the IndieFeed Performance podcast for 10 years. Here he is.
Hey Jay, how you doing?
I'm excellent. How are you doing?
Very good. I'm excited to be your first guest on your podcast. This is exciting.
It really is. Thank you so much for being on.
You're welcome.
So I just told everybody that you were in the IndieFeed thing for a long time. A decade's wow,
Yeah,
that's a long time.
IndieFeed was quite a project. Yeah, it was 10 years of performance poetry. We did actually about 1,600 shows. We featured about, God, I can't remember how many. It had to be like 700 or 800 poets over the course of those 10 years. So it was about 10 million downloads. So it was I think we had a good run, but I felt like I needed to bring it to an end after a good 10-year run. So I closed it down as of July.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I take it back, as of February.
True. Yes, that's right. You mentioned that the other day in the email.
Yeah.
So since you're not doing that anymore, what are you doing?
Well, actually, I've changed my life around quite a bit since I shut down IndieFeed. I quit my day job. I was working as a records manager at Dartmouth College, and I quit that job and I quit IndieFeed, and now I'm dedicating pretty much all of my time to both my own writing and a new project which is called the Performance Poetry Preservation Project.
Would you like to tell us about that?
Oh, sure. That's actually that's kind of my passion right now, and I'm kind of excited about it. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. Maybe you can ask me some questions as we roll here. But P4 is an organization that's dedicated to capturing and preserving the history of the Poetry Slam movement. So the Poetry Slam has been around for about 25 years, but during all those times, and during all those years, there's been a lot of recordings made, and we just wanted to be able to capture those recordings and make sure they don't get lost, because a lot of this stuff is on old media. It's on like CDs and tapes and videotapes, and all that stuff has a tendency to age and become unlistenable after a while. And we figured if we didn't start capturing and preserving this stuff now, if we waited 25 more years, chances are pretty good that all this stuff would be gone. You'd put it in the CD player and find out that the disc had become unplayable, or you would find out that the format had changed. So if we don't capture it now and we don't preserve it now, we're going to lose a huge part of the history of this movement. And we feel like Poetry Slam is like really, really important because it kind of captures the zeitgeist, the feel of a particular moment of time. So the Poetry Slam of 25 years ago is going to be different than the Poetry Slam of today, and the Poetry Slam of New York City is going to be different than the Poetry Slam of San Francisco. So if we can get all of this material and we can get it all into a repository and digitize it and preserve it and index it, we think it can be a great resource for scholars and academics and poetry fans and just anybody that's really interested in this as a particular kind of grassroots arts movement.
Wonderful. What is the end goal? How are you archiving it? What's the preferred archive format?
Well, the goal is that we want to partner with an academic repository, and by that I mean like a library or a big academic institution that would actually be the storehouse for this stuff. So let's say we partnered with a university library. Our job as a grassroots arts community would be to continue to gather this material as it's being produced, ongoing, forever. And as we gather it, we index it, we tell the institution what it's all about, and then we transfer those recordings over to them. They do the digitization. They put it into their repository. They create the infrastructure for access and retrieval. And so it becomes this kind of partnership between the grassroots arts community, which is the Poetry Slam community, and academia, scholars, and people that are really interested in this stuff as well. So we think it's kind of interesting. It's an interesting project in that way because there's really no model for this kind of a partnership between an academic repository and a grassroots arts movement. So we think we're kind of breaking some new ground with this.
Well, I've never heard of anything like it before. Sounds like quite the undertaking.
Yeah, I think it will be, and we've already started to collect material. We have about, close to 2,000 items right now, and by items I mean like discs or CDs or chapbooks or pretty much anything you can imagine. And we've got about 2,000 of those right now, and I figure that if you actually took a look at individual poems or individual performances on those, we probably have tens of thousands of individual recordings right now. So our job right now is really huge. We're taking this stuff and we're indexing it and cataloging it into a website that is going to provide us with at least a listing of all the objects that we have. And then we can start looking for an academic repository to actually take it on and become the place where it all goes.
Wonderful. To roll back to IndieFeed for a second.
What's that?
To roll back to IndieFeed for a second. Are you taking
sure.
everything from IndieFeed and archiving it into the P4?
Yeah, that was one of the first donations that we had. So all 1,600 of the shows from IndieFeed, of course, I just kind of took them and moved them all over to P4. So that became the seed of the collection. But it certainly wasn't the only thing we got. Right, one of the very first collections that I had kind of pressed into my hands, and this would have been, oh God, I'm guessing it's probably been about 10 maybe not quite that, maybe 8 years ago. I was down at the Bowery Poetry Club in New York City, and we were putting on a show at the Urbana Poetry Slam, and Taylor Mawley was the slam master that evening. And he was interviewing me on stage, and we were talking in the audience, and would tell them a little bit about this kind of dream I had of being able to start preserving the history of the Poetry Slam. And he went and grabbed a box and pushed it into my hands, and it was a box of mini disc recordings of the entire 2001 season of the Urbana Slam. And I looked at the labels on those discs, and it's like everybody who was anybody had performed that year at the Urbana Slam. So every big name you could imagine was in that list. And he just says, well, we're not going to do anything with this stuff. You need to take it. So we have that now. We have that entire season on mini discs. So how long are we going to be able to play mini discs? It's hard to even find a player for that right
I
now.
don't think I've ever seen a mini disc player.
Yeah, they're like a CD inside of a plastic case, but they're about the size of, like, I don't know, like half the size of a CD. So we have to get that stuff off there, because if we don't, that's definitely going to get lost forever. But that's the kind of thing we're finding, is that as we travel to the different slams that are out there, myself and the other people that are involved with this project, we tell them what we're doing, and they say, yeah, I've got a closet full of stuff, or I've got an attic, or I've got a basement, or I know somebody that has a ton of this stuff. And we're starting to have people begin to send us things. People are sending us collections of chapbooks and collections of CDs that they've just burned themselves, or recordings they made themselves in their venues. And
That's
that's
really
really what we're
cool.
looking for. Yeah. Yeah, we really want to try to get that unique material. It's pretty easy to get, like, Buddy Wakefield's published CDs or Taylor Mawley's CDs. We can get those pretty easily.
But
But
they're
what we really
good.
want are those unique materials. We want this stuff that was just recorded once and it doesn't exist anywhere except for that one piece of media. We want to get that stuff and start preserving that. That's our biggest goal.
There's my other half and I went down to see Taylor in it's weird, Worcester, I think it's called. It's weird. I live in
Yeah.
New Hampshire and Vermont, and I still don't not entirely sure I know how to say it. Worcester, I
Yeah.
think it is.
Worcester.
Worcester.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like a
there we go.
Bostonian.
Now it
Worcester.
sounds right. Yeah. We went down to Worcester in a blistering snowstorm. It was
Yeah.
he was at a little tiny coffee house, isn't he always?
Yeah.
Or some big very fancy place. And we
Yeah,
driven
I'm trying to think of
from
the name of that one.
I don't remember. It was wonderful. It was a little tiny hole in the ground. It was probably
Yeah.
no bigger than two of the rooms in my house, but it
Yeah.
was wonderful. And I walk in, and they had an open mic night, and it was like one part open mic, one part performance poetry. It was kind of both at the same time. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
get
That's
there,
great.
and Taylor was up there, and he did Miracle Workers, I think. The part where he goes,
Yeah.
wow, that thing. He did that for
Yeah, that
like an
sounds familiar.
extra
Yeah.
minute and a half. And I bet he's never recorded it like that. And it was so much fun. And it
Oh,
sounds like
yeah.
you're
That's
collecting
great.
things like that, things that only exist the one time.
Well, right, and we have people that are in the poetry slam scene that actually kind of like the idea that poetry slam happens and it's ephemeral and it exists and then it's gone. And there are some people that don't like the fact that we're collecting this stuff because they really think poetry slam should be this kind of in the moment thing and that it shouldn't be captured for long term preservation. But we kind of disagree. We think there's so much magic happening in these little venues like that one in Worcester, or there's hundreds of slams across the country. I think there's something like 200 and something slams across
Wow.
the world right now. And there's so much amazing stuff that's happening in those venues that it feels like a shame to just let it all kind of disappear. Which is part of the reason why I did IndieFeed. One of the big things about IndieFeed, my favorite part of IndieFeed, was when I would go to New York City and I would just go to the Cornelia Street Cafe, or I would go to Louder Arts, or just walk into one of these places and find the organizer and say, hey, you mind if I take my little recorder here and just record the evening? And I got dozens of those kinds of recordings where I just sat in a poetry venue in New York and turned on my recorder and captured whatever came across the stage. And those were some kind of really magical, cool things right now. So my dream is that down the road we get a lot of this stuff into the repository, and then we can say to the world, hey, poet, come search for yourself in here. And I bet you people are going to start finding things that are captured and recorded that they never knew about, that somebody actually captured that moment, and that's all going to be in this long-term repository.
That's wonderful. And that'll be quite the trip for them, I think, when they go, oh, I remember when I did this, or I don't even remember doing that.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's funny because this is one of the things that we have to deal with, and we've been thinking through a lot about this. Is that there are going to be poets that don't want older versions of their works or bad performances of their works kind of put out into the world. So we've been devising. We actually worked with a legal consultant. We went down to things that they didn't want exposed to the public could still be in the repository, could still be captured, could still be preserved, but would only be available for scholarly use as opposed to public use. So we're going to find as we go forward, we're going to have to be working with the poets to get permission to put this stuff out into the public realm. We don't want to put anything out into a public realm that the poets themselves don't feel comfortable having out there. So it's kind of this balance between making sure that we're capturing and preserving our history, but also not violating the poets' desire in terms of what they want to have accessible and what they don't want to have accessible. So it's kind of a dance, and we're kind of working our way through the details of it as we go.
That's good that it matters to you, though, that you're taking their opinions and beliefs and wants at least as heavy as the material itself, which is really important.
Exactly.
You mentioned, you keep saying we, even though it sounds, I'm talking to you, but you keep saying you use the word we, and there's lots of us. Who else is helping you in the project?
Well, there's actually several of us. There's a board of directors we have, and on our board of directors, there's five of us. Tom Bouliane is our president. Actually, I'm the executive director, and our president is Tom Bouliane. We have Kristen O'Keefe Afterwards on the board. We've got Marty McConnell on our board, and we've got Karen Garabrandt on the board. So that's a group of five of us that are kind of currently working to move this stuff forward. Plus, we've got tons of advisors. We've got a lot of people in academia that have been helping us out. There's a couple of professors at different schools that have kind of been helping us think through the what it would take to actually work with an academic repository. We're working with a consultant out in upstate New York who's helping us think through indexing. How do you take a recording that is an hour and a half long and index it so that people can find a particular poet or a particular performance on that hour and a half long recording as opposed to having to listen to the whole thing? And this consultant has actually worked with oral histories, and they're used to being able to take long recordings of people doing oral histories and be able to find the subjects within those oral histories and be able to index those subjects in those long recordings. So it translates really well to trying to index a long recording of a poetry evening.
Wonderful.
So they're helping us think through those kinds of issues as well. There's an amazing amount of kind of back work you have to do when you're doing a project like this. It's a lot of organizational stuff and a lot of planning and a lot of design work. And we've been around for like 4 or 5 years now, but we're really only now starting to kind of get ourselves out to the public. We've been kind of working in the background for years.
It sounds like you're kind of starting now and rewinding through time, which is really, which sounds like a lot of fun, but it also sounds like a lot of work.
Oh, it's a ton of work. Yeah, I'm actually officially working half time at this. I'm an actual hired employee of P4 right now, so that I can actually do this work in a more full-time way.
Wow.
But there are volunteers that have done hundreds of hours of work for us. We did an indexing test just recently where we took 200 poems and we distributed them out to about 20 volunteers and had them listen to them and index them based upon several different criteria we asked them to think about. And that information we got back from that test was what we used to be able to help design our indexing strategy. So we have to think through those kinds of things before we actually start really kind of gearing ourselves up. We want to be really prepared when we start really putting material out to the world.
Sounds like you have a plan, though. That's good.
Yeah, there's definitely a plan.
I'd love to have you.
Years,
Sorry.
I said it's probably gonna take a lot of years, but we'll get there.
Slow and steady, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love to have you on the show in the future again. In the future, if I could get updates from you so I could give it to the people on my channel, that would be wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. That'd be great, definitely. And in the meantime, if folks want to check us out, it should give you the website so you can kind of check out and see what we're doing. You'll find us at poetrypreservation.org. So all one word, poetrypreservation.org, and that website will kind of give you a sense of all the things we're doing. We have a blog there. We've got a featured poem that we put out every couple of weeks. We put out a new featured poem. We've got all our collection guidelines, information on how to volunteer, information on how to send us materials, and pretty much anything you might want to know should be on that website. But you can also write to me, and that's just mongo@poetrypreservation.org, and anybody that's interested should definitely drop me a line.
I'll make sure I have links for that in the description of the page.
Excellent. That'd be wonderful.
You mentioned that you've gotten back to your own writing. Do you have anything you would want to read?
Oh, God, no. I wasn't even thinking about that. So, no, I don't.
I've heard you say in the past that you're more of a host than a poet.
Well, yeah, actually, I've always thought of myself as more of a poetry promoter than a poet myself, but
To
I've
be
always
fair,
wanted to
I
kind of
said
switch
that just
that.
to make you
Yeah, I
recoil.
mean, I always say I'm a podcaster, a poetry promoter, and then a poet, and probably in that order. But now podcaster probably has to move to the end. Uh, but yeah, I seem like I'd much rather see, kind of promote the poetry of others than my own most of the
I did
time.
that just to watch you listen to you recoil in fear. I'm terrible. That was me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, next time if we do a follow up, give me a warning, and I'll find something that I want to read.
Okay. In one of the last podcasts on IndieFeed, I listened to Justin Wu's poem, New
Yeah.
York is the worst, best. No. You know the one I'm talking about. I'm saying it wrong. And I'm terribly sorry to you and Justin Wu. I was so enthralled by your beginning. It sounds like you and he have quite the relationship and that you guys worked
Oh,
really well together.
Justin was great. He was the kind of my right hand guy for the last couple of years of IndieFeed, maybe even longer than that. And we've never met face to face. This is the glory of podcasting, is you get to all these close relationships with people that you've never met. But he and I never actually met. But he did all this work where he would go out and do interviews with poets, and he would do guest hosting gigs on the show, and he did an amazing amount of work. And yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite people.
Wonderful. I always assumed that you had met because you co-podcasted together. How is
Well,
it?
we never hosted a show together. He did his shows and I did mine. He was always one of my guest hosts. The nice thing about IndieFeed toward the end is that I had about 7 or 8 guest hosts that would come in and do shows, and I had some folks that were just kind of one-off. They would just come and do one show every once in a while, and then I
Mhm.
had others like Justin that were just regulars. They would come and do shows all the time. Had a guy out in the UK, Pete the Temp, who did amazing interviews. He would go to different poetry events in the UK, and he would interview and he would listen. He would get poets to perform their work live, and he would put together a show from it. He probably did 20 or 30 shows that way, and they were always great. And I've never met him either. So I'm not too far from you. I'm up in Vermont, and I'm in a little kind of like a 10-acre parcel up here on the top of a hill in Vermont, and I don't get to the city very often. I think a lot of my internet poetry work has been because it's so hard for me to get to the venues. I feel like I kind of get a lot of my poetry fixed just kind of living online vicariously for other people.
Do you live alone? Do you have family that helps or keeps you from anything?
I live with my partner up here, and just the two of us live here, and it's a nice existence. I love it up here. Actually, Vermont's beautiful. So.
Yeah, I've probably been. I don't know if I've been to where you are, but I've been through a fair amount of Vermont. It's kind of right next to me.
Yeah. Well, when I worked at Dartmouth College, that was over the border in Vermont. So,
And yeah,
excuse me, in New Hampshire. So yeah, I'm used to New Hampshire.
Vermont and New Hampshire are both really, really pretty places. You
Yes,
mentioned
they
that
are.
Christine Aptowitz is on the board with you. I've heard a lot.
Yes.
Heard a lot of her stuff too. She's wonderful.
Oh, she's amazing.
What is the word?
She's more than just a board member for me. She's kind of like my muse and my hero and everything in between. She's hugely responsible for me taking the plunge and quitting my job and doing this stuff full time and doing my own work full time. She's been and it's funny if you talk to a lot of people particularly in the poetry slam world. A lot of people will tell you that about her. She's the motivation and the muse for so many people. She's been so supportive of everybody that's out there trying to write poetry. She's kind of a community treasure in a lot of ways.
Well, it sounds. I imagine you've archived her work. Yes.
Oh yeah, we got a lot of her work.
Excellent.
We got all of her chapbooks. We got a lot of recordings of her. Yeah, she was the founder of the Urbana Slam. So she was running the Urbana Slam back in the 20 years ago when they were just starting in the basement of CBGB's down in New York City. So there's a lot of her work out there in the world.
There's a poem that I actually think is on I have a DVD, one of Taylor Molly's DVDs, on my shelf of a collection of works. It might have been a comprehensive, just one show. I never could
Yeah.
actually tell. And
Is
she's
it the Taylor Molly and Friends
that one.
DVD?
That one.
Yeah, that's a popular one.
And she's in it, and I believe that's where she performs about how somebody commented that poetry is, if it's funny, it can't be poetry, and she goes just
Yeah, she proves that wrong all the time. Yeah, one of my favorite poems of hers is one called "Crack Squirrels," about the squirrels in Central Park that are getting stoned off of the crack pipes that are left around the park. It's hilarious.
I've never heard that. That sounds funny as hell.
Yeah, find that out. It's really fun.
That's fun.
Yeah, she's now doing her own writing, and mostly she's writing nonfiction right now. She
Really?
published a book on a physician named Dr. Mutter, a history of him and his work in early medicine, and she's really being successful, doing really well right now. So,
That's fantastic. I had no idea. That's
yeah.
wonderful.
And that's one thing I find interesting about poetry slammers, especially, is that usually slammers do go on to other things. They don't stay poetry slammers forever. Either they leave the art form completely, or if they do stay writers, they go on to fiction, or they go on to to more page poetry. They don't usually stick around with performance poetry in the long haul. So that's one thing that's kind of cool, is that there's people like kind of thing Saul Williams. He starts out in poetry slam, and now he's got a rap career, a hip hop career. And then there's people like Ernie Klein, who was he
Oh, I
started out in
love
the
Ernie
poetry slam.
Klein.
Yeah, he was a poetry slam, and now he's a best-selling author, and having his next his first book is being made into a movie by Steven Spielberg. So
Have you read that book?
yeah. Ready Player One is great.
Loved it. It has got to be the
Yeah.
nerdiest, geekiest thing I have ever
Oh,
read. That was
absolutely.
it was awesome.
Yeah, he's great. Ernie's a great guy.
It was
Yeah,
fantastic.
so
I love that book.
it's a fun. I think poetry slam and slam performance poetry in general is just a lot of. It's really a fun and interesting and diverse group of people, and I think that's what keeps me so interested in it. It's as much the people in the community as it is the poetry.
Having a passion is good. It took me forever to figure out what I wanted to do. I've wanted to do what we're doing right now, to
Yeah.
interview and have a podcast with performance poets.
Well, I'm
Since
excited that you're doing it because
Thank you.
I think there's room out there. I don't think anything really came after IndieFeed. So if you can if you can capture that audience and continue to get performance poetry out in the podcast format, that's
I would
excellent.
love to.
Definitely go for it.
I've wanted to do this since I was probably 15. I
Really?
I was in high school and Taylor Molly came to our junior year. It might have been my senior year. It was a while ago now.
Yeah.
I think it was my junior year. He came to we had Awareness Day or something. And there was
Mm-hmm.
two big events. There was a Rwandan refugee singing group at the beginning of the day and
Yeah.
Taylor Molly at the end. And
Sure.
I wrote poetry before that, but it was the same sappy crap that I always wrote. I didn't know
Yeah.
you could just do what you wanted. That was cool.
Yeah.
And Taylor gets up there and performs. I don't even remember what. It was I was so enthralled that it didn't have iambic pentameter or any of that. He just got up and said what he wanted to say, and it was fun and it was lyrical and there was a certain majesty to it, but it wasn't wrapped in stuffy coding. It was
Exactly.
poetry
Yeah.
for the person, not poetry for the staff. It was cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what Taylor really embodies, is this ability to kind of like find your own voice. And the way he works with kids and going to schools and kind of helping them free themselves from the limitations that they put on themselves about what being a writer, what being a poet means, and gets them to break all that down and kind of start from scratch and say, speak, find what's in your heart and get it out into the world, and that is poetry. That's a people. So, Taylor's an amazing phenomenon as well. I feel like I'm spending this whole interview just telling you how wonderful all the people in this community are.
Who knows? Maybe they're just that wonderful. It sounds like they are.
Yeah, they definitely are. It's a good group of people.
So we're about wrapped up with this half hour, but I did have one more thing I wanted to ask you,
Okay, sure.
which is when you're not doing the P4 and you're not sleeping and you're not eating, is there anything you do to occupy your time to as much wonderful as this is, I imagine it's fairly stressful from time to time. What do you do to de-stress?
Well, actually, I think this has been the thing I've done to de-stress. Before I quit my day job, like I said, I was a records manager at Dartmouth College, and that was a career I had for. Well, I worked there 22 years, but I was in the field for like 30. And that was a real high stress job that I went to every day. So I would go to this job and deal with this kind of academia and stressful stuff. And what I would do after that was over is write poetry, or I would listen to poetry, or I would do a podcast, and all of that became the way for me to de-stress. So now that I've quit that job and I'm doing P4 and I'm doing my own poetry, I feel like I've got this kind of blessed existence right now where I get up in the morning and do what I want to do every day. And I feel like, God, I've worked I'm just 55. I'm retired early. But I feel like I've kind of managed to create this really blessed existence living inside of the poetry world that I don't feel like I need to do much other than this to just make myself happy. This is finally moment of my life where I get to do the thing that brings me joy, and it feels pretty cool.
It sounds like you earned it, though. I think everybody deserves that nugget of happiness.
Well, yeah, I think I worked really hard for a lot of years, so
And I
I
mean,
don't feel like I begrudge the fact that I get to
that's
take
good.
some time here at the end to do what I'm really passionate about, and so it's a good time of life.
Then don't sell yourself short for having a lesser. That's not unfair at all. I was
Yeah,
telling one of my friends earlier today, actually. He had just heard, I think, a Buddy Wakefield poem.
yeah,
Somebody threw it at him. It was on somebody's MP3 player in the car, and he was like, "Whoa, that was cool. What was that?" He
yeah,
calls me, and goes, "Jay, have you ever heard of the Cannonball Man?" And I went,
yeah.
"Maybe. You want to be more specific?" He goes,
That's
"It's a
funny.
poem." I said, "Yeah, that's by Buddy Wakefield. He is not the Cannonball Man, I don't think."
That's funny that poem's become he's taken on that name because that's a pretty famous poem of his. But
It's a wonderful poem.
yeah,
And
yeah,
he
it's
said,
great.
if I wanted to learn more about him and kind of this poetic blast that it was, where would I
Yeah,
get more? And I said, well, for the time being, go to IndieFeed and then jump over to the performance poetry the P4. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, eventually the P4 will be great, but right now, IndieFeed's a great spot because we put out so many of Buddy's poems that if you go to the old IndieFeed site, it's still all there.
oh yeah,
You just go to the site and then you look up Buddy Wakefield, and all of his pieces are indexed there. You can just listen to them one after another.
he did. He called me back and was like, "Whoa, that's amazing. Who is this Mongo guy?" And I said, "Mongo is, if you wanted poetry, he is the hookup man. He has the network."
Well, I hope we can leverage that network into keeping this stuff around for the long haul. It doesn't kind of disappear with the with the years.
So in one of the pictures you gave me, which is going to be in the video, there's you.
Yeah.
I recognize you and Christine. Who's the other guy?
That's Tom. Tom is
Okay.
he's our board president. And a little bit about him. His daughter is Gabrielle Boulain, who passed away several years ago, but she was one of the biggest videographers on the poetry slam scene, and a huge part of our collection is the videography that she did because she was the like for Poetry Slam Inc. for all of the PSI events.
Hmm.
She was the one that was behind the camera taking those movies. So we've got all those tapes, and we want to make sure those get preserved. But when she passed away, Tom is kind of doing this in honor of her legacy for all the work that she did to try to capture and preserve the history of poetry. He's taking her legacy forward now that she's gone. So it's a quite a way to honor his daughter.
Yeah, that sounds really heavy.
Yeah,
Like I actually
yeah,
just stopped breathing for a second. That's really amazing. Good for him.
yeah, yeah,
Not that he lost his daughter, but that he's carrying
yeah.
the torch for her. That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, if you go back in the IndieFeed archives and look up Gabrielle Boulain, you're going to see a tribute show we did to her right after she passed away, where everybody who loved her called and left messages. And unfortunately, she passed away before she was able to hear it. We put the show together as quickly as we could once she started getting ill, but she didn't last long enough to hear the tribute show. But it came out a few days after she passed away.
That's horrible. But
Yeah.
the effort is what matters. Effort's always what's important.
Yeah, and it's definitely that. There's one little moment to honor her, and her family got to hear it, and all of her friends that needed to help process her passing got to hear it. So those are all important things.
That's good. If I could thank you one more time for being on the show, we really are just about out of time.
Oh yeah, I'm
But
sure.
thank you
Well, I
so
really
much.
appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me, and definitely keep me up to date as things move forward with the show. I wish you the best of luck with it.
Thank you so much. Thanks
All right,
again.
you're welcome.
Bye.
Okay, bye.